Słucham panią.
Chciałam z panem porozmawiać.
O Boże, ze mną? O czym?
Elżbieta Lorenz.
Ja pani nie znam.
Tak, nie poznaliśmy się, ale mieliśmy się poznać w czasie wojny. Miałam u państwa...
No, zaraz. Ja nie chcę mówić o tym, co było w czasie wojny. Nie chcę mówić o tym, co było po wojnie. Nie chcę mówić o tym, co jest teraz. Ja mogę pani uszyć garconkę, płaszcz albo kostium. Proszę, niech pani sobie wybierze fason. Proszę bardzo. Proszę.
Pan miał mnie uratować. Chciałam podziękować za to, że pan chciał.
Ma pani swój materiał? Bo teraz to tak trudno, wie pani, coś kupić.
Ja mam wtedy 6 lat. To był luty 43 rok.
Tak, ja miałem wtedy 22 lata. No co, płaszcz?
Pan ma bardzo stare żurnale. Czy obraziłby się pan, gdybym przysłała panu jakieś nowsze?
Nie. No ten właśnie przywiózł mi ktoś z zagranicy, ale to było wiele lat temu. No, potem już nie było okazji.
Naprawdę nie porozmawia pan ze mną.
Naprawdę.
This is Criteria. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Criteria. My name is James Majewski, and I'm joined here today by my co-host, Thomas V. Miris. Hi,
Hello.
Thomas. So we're recording another episode remotely from our families' respective homes in Manassas, Virginia.
Yeah.
I don't know when this episode is going to be coming out, but at the time of recording, we just had pretty significant flooding in New York City, which providentially, conveniently, blessedly, Thomas and I were both out of the state for. So that's nice. Although we're heading back to New York City today after cutting this recording, and I'm a little anxious because my apartment, I don't have roommates who have been looking after my apartment or anything.
Right.
So I hope that I don't show up and find leaks in the roof and water damage or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
So we're here today to discuss Dekalog 8,
Yes.
the eighth installment in Krzysztof. How do you pronounce it? Krzysztof Kieslowski.
I'm doing Duolingo Polish lessons right now, but I haven't gotten to the section on auteur film directors.
Kieslowski's series for Polish television in the late 80s, inspired by the Ten Commandments. So we are now on commandment number 8. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor.
Now, is that commandment just like looped in with not lying? For some reason,
Seems to be.
Yeah, I feel like thou shalt not lie deserves its own commandment. But, far be it from me to criticize God's revelation of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, I think it's just like a specific, like the ones on coveting are pretty specific, but they cover coveting in general.
Right.
So
yeah, it's just interesting, why do you think that in revealing the moral law in this way, the emphasis is placed upon bearing false witness,
Yeah.
It emphasizes the sense in which people are owed the truth,
Yes. Yeah, that is an interesting question, and it's brought up in this episode briefly, like the difference between lying and bearing false witness specifically. So this is, in a way, one of the more straightforward episodes, I would say. Basically, to explain the concept of this episode, decades before the setting of this story, back during World War II, I think it's February 1943 specifically, a little Jewish girl, 6-year-old, comes to the apartment of a couple, a Catholic couple, who were going to take her in under the pretense of her being a Catholic child. In other words, they were going to have to present a fake baptismal certificate to the Jewish authorities. Then she arrives with her guardian at the time, and they turn her away, saying it turns out it's against their Catholic principles to lie about this. So although they want to save her life, they can't be the ones to help her. Decades later, the woman of this couple is a ethics professor in Warsaw, and the child, who is now grown up and survived unbeknownst to this woman, comes to confront her and sort of confront her with the fact that she's alive and try to find out for her, try to make sense of why she wouldn't take her in all those years ago. So this is basically the story.
Yeah, and the rest of the film is kind of this strange, sort of the two together, kind of sort of pacing around each other and observing each other and discussing the past, but also very much, working things out in the present. It's straightforward in the sense that, well, okay, you tell me what sense in which you think that this is a straightforward Decalogue.
Well, I would say that, like, the surface level moral conundrum, to do with the eighth commandment is fairly apparent, and it's pretty much all delivered verbally,
Right.
Because we're looking at a situation in retrospect. Where it perhaps gets less straightforward is in the consequences and, like, the fallout of these choices.
Right, which I think is what this film is grappling with much more than the ethical problem that's presented, right?
Right.
It's almost a cliche at this point, whether it was at the time of Kieslowski making this film or not, I don't know, but oftentimes when we talk about the duty to tell the truth, the sort of like immediate problematizing scenario is, well, yeah, what if the Gestapo comes along and knocks on your door and asks you, where are the Jews? What do you do? Right? So this is not exactly that, but it's similar enough. It's sort of, casting this responsibility to tell the truth in its most extreme problematic circumstance, and it demands a response. Now, the response to that is given in the film pretty quickly. The older woman whose name
Zofia.
Yes,
and
Zofia.
The younger woman is Elżbieta.
Elżbieta, yeah. So Zofia is an ethics professor. So this is very convenient for Kieslowski because the first 10, 15 minutes of the film are just in her ethics classroom where we get to hear from the students these ethical problems presented.
Yeah, the class is called, the class or the segment of the class she's teaching is called, she refers to as ethical hell.
Yes.
That's what they're engaged in.
Yes. But when this particular problem is brought up, notably by Elżbieta, who's visiting the class,
she's the translator. She's the English translator. She's now in America, and she's the English translator of her works. So they've had this relationship. They've even met before without, the older woman knowing who the younger woman was.
Yes, yes. So she's posed this as a problem for the class. Of course, she knows that this is a true story. She even says it's a true story, but she hasn't quite divulged that this is her story. But we begin to see Zofia kind of recognize that this may be the young girl from all
Right.
those years ago.
Yeah.
But the answer, right, is provided almost right away by one of the students saying, well, that's not really a Catholic response. Like no true Catholic would really say that this would be bearing false witness against their neighbor. And that's accepted by everybody in the class.
Mhm.
And so what Sophia says is, could there be another reason? And Elżbieta admits, I've thought about it and I can't think of another reason that would justify it. Another student proposes that maybe it's fear
Yeah.
of the consequences. And Elżbieta says, yeah, but does that really justify it? He says, no, I'm not judging. I'm just saying this could be another rationale. So that seems to be the path that Kieslowski and Pisevich set us on at the beginning. Sort of, we're in this unstable space where we've been given the apparent reasoning, but almost immediately we're told that that's not the real reason. And we know that it's deeper. We know that there's something more that hasn't quite been excavated. And it's this sort of unstable space, this tense space, this ambiguous space that is not so straightforward. And it's the space that these two characters, Zofia and Elżbieta, continue to occupy through the rest of the film.
Yeah.
Now, so that's why I say that this is a less straightforward one, because whereas some of the previous Decalogues are very snappy, very, even thrilling, very dramatic, this one is a more subdued, more subtle, more kind of calculated and measured installment of this series.
Mm-hmm.
Because it mostly, again, has the two of them kind of, circling one another and watching one another, not always being forthright with one another. The whole thing is steeped in a kind of distrust or suspicion right from the very beginning.
Yes.
I want to talk about when we're first introduced to Elżbieta. Zofia arrives at the school where she teaches, and the dean's secretary tells her, the dean wants to speak with you. And she goes into the dean's office, not knowing, what this may be about. And we see Elżbieta, the young woman, sitting there with the dean. She's introduced as, a researcher from the United States, a translator of Zofia's works, and she would like to sit in on the class if that's okay. But through this whole interaction among the three of them, there's this weird sort of like stiltedness, this weird kind of almost like performativity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost as if you're not sure. It makes you think about Poland at the time, being in a totalitarian state.
Yeah, it's the end. It's the end of that scene that's kind of throws you off. Like, so he says, "Excuse me," and he walks out of his office with Zofia, leaving Elżbieta behind in the office, and then he just kind of looks back at her through the doorway, and then we see her sitting down. And then he looks back at her some more and then closes the door. And it's like, wait, what was that all about?
Yes. His expression is very much one of like scrutiny or distrust.
Yeah.
And hers is almost kind of defiant in response. It makes me think of, the difficulty of living under a communist regime and not being sure of who is
who's this woman from America who speaks really good Polish?
Right. Even that comes as a surprise to him, right? She introduces herself as, yes, I've translated your works, and we're given to understand that this is the first time that she's indicated that she speaks Polish fluently. Mm-hmm. He says, you've left me here grappling with English, and she says, you grapple very well. But it's like, was she toying with him? Was she just sort of letting him struggle in this, in having to speak English? That's just the first instance of what becomes a long sequence in these opening scenes of not fully divulging the truth, of putting up some pretense, and not
like when she tells the story, she initially says a different neighborhood than where it actually happened.
That's right.
And then when she does the whole game with her, where Zofia takes Elżbieta to the apartment complex, to the building where this all took place, and then Elżbieta goes and walks around and then like hides so that Sophia has to go and look for her and spend all this time in this place herself.
There's literal hide and seek going
right.
on in this film,
Right.
you know, but it's not just on Elżbieta's side, right? Zofia also isn't totally forthright. So in that instance that you mentioned, Thomas, where she brings Elżbieta to the apartment where this all took place, she does so under false pretenses. She says, "Can I take you out to dinner?"
Right.
You know, and then she doesn't take her out to dinner. She takes her to this place that maybe Elżbieta doesn't want to revisit. After Elżbieta ducks her and forces Zofia to kind of go into this apartment complex and search for her, really worry about her, you almost get the sense that actually Zofia has returned here for herself, that she might not even be totally forthright with herself about her motives, right? So she's ostensibly doing this for Elżbieta, to bring her back to this apartment and kind of confront the past. But as she's searching for Elżbieta, you really get the sense that she's the one looking for something. And it's not just Elżbieta. She goes up to the old apartment where she used to live, and she rings on the doorbell, and she interacts with some of the people in there. You know, and it's not at all obvious that she's doing this simply because she's looking for Elżbieta. There's a sense, I think, that she's also looking for something for herself.
Yeah.
So this is really kind of the space that this film lives in for almost the entirety.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of time on things where you're like, why was that in there? You know, there's quite a number of elements where,
and there's a lot of talking, right? There's a lot of conversations between Elżbieta and Zofia. So at the beginning, we have these sort of abstract philosophical, ethical problems being presented in a very detached manner. And then that almost continues as they're talking about their past. They're talking about, you know, their present, and it's almost like they're doing so in an analytic way. It's like the ethics conversation just continues to unfold through the whole of their time together. And so you know, I mentioned that some of these past Dekalog films I think have been very snappy, very entertaining, very fun, and even thrilling to watch. This one, when I watched it the first time, I was not in the right frame of mind. I was like, it was like the end of the day. I was tired. I was looking forward to just watching, you know, something short, something that could just like pull me in and not drag on for too long. And dude, I struggled the first time I watched this because it just tonally and in its pacing, and in its subject, it was just not what I was prepared to engage with, because I think this demands a kind of going deeper, as most of these all of these Decalogues really ask of the viewer, but it doesn't give you too much on the surface level that's like snappy and attractive and exciting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it may be a weakness of this episode on a cinematic level that, you know, for example, this classroom scene it's like 11 it's 11 and a half minutes long, this scene. I checked, and I don't know how well it holds up to repeat viewing that scene, you know.
It's kind of brutal.
It's kind of like once you've got the information that's conveyed in it, there's not that much more to get out of it.
Well, you know, there is something interesting that goes on in that scene that I wanted to mention and talk about a little bit, because there clearly is a way in which translation, or the act of translation, is functioning in this film. So we've already mentioned that Elżbieta is a translator of Zofia's works. Which, I mean, this is remarkable. This is the woman who turned you away as a young girl, who you've never totally understood her motives, but you've devoted your career to translating her works from the Polish into English. this is significant. And then later in the classroom, we see that there's one student who ostensibly is some kind of foreign exchange student.
He's Nigerian, yeah.
Right. We noticed this because he's not some like pasty-faced Polish kid. And he's the only one who's not, in fact. And he has a translator next to him who's speaking to him as these ethical problems are being presented. What's interesting is that at some point during this classroom scene, a kind of drunk or hungover student stumbles into the classroom late, disrupting everything and totally derailing the conversation. And there's this awkward moment of tension where it's like, who's going to do something?
Yeah.
And it's that Nigerian student who gets really kind of agitated and just says, "Get out," in English.
Yeah.
He just cuts through and says, "Get out." And that the first time I saw that moment, I was kind of bewildered. I didn't really know what to make of that.
Right.
But then the second time I watched it, I was tracking this aspect of translation a little more closely, and it made me think about how translation is a problem. There's a problem in trying to understand these ethical problems that are being presented in translation. So much can easily be lost, and yet there are circumstances when they're present, when they're immediate, where there is no language barrier. That student knew that this cannot stand, and the guy has to get out. And so he's just as capable of speaking to the moral demands of that emergent scenario as anybody else in that classroom. And so it got me thinking about what I think really is the broader concern of this film. Because we've talked about how it doesn't seem to be just this specific problem of false witness with this Jewish girl and this Polish family. It seems to be about something more than that. I think that this is a film about Poland, a film about a specific society, a specific culture grappling with a specific moment in history, namely World War II and the Holocaust. This is something that the whole world has had to deal with, right? But I think for Poland, it takes on a different kind of urgency and complexity. And I can only say this looking in from the outside, right? I'm not a Polish national, so I'm speculating here a little bit. But when I went to Poland, I didn't have to be there long to get the sense that the Holocaust did mean something different for Poland. I mean, this is where Auschwitz, their railroads, like the very railroads that I rode on to get around Poland, are the railroads that were used to transport thousands upon thousands of innocent Jewish people to their extermination in Poland. And so the you can blame the Nazis, but there were also Polish people who collaborated or who resisted or who were somewhere in between. And that's a complicated thing to try to understand. And so I think that this film is kind of taking for its subject, sort of through the characters of Zofia and Elżbieta, this problem of understanding the past and understanding the exigencies of the past and the moral problems of the past, the demands of the past, right? And that's not just for people looking in from the outside, but also for those who were touched by it themselves.
Yeah, this episode goes out of its way to be kind of meta, or not meta exactly, but like it is kind of more self-reflective. We get an explicit reference to the characters in episode 3, for instance, given as a scenario in the ethics class, and it's explicitly remarked upon twice in this film that those people are real and they lived in this same apartment complex, and kind of a lot of people know their story. And then we see all these other characters in the film who are kind of, I don't know, lonely and traumatized by past events. We get this guy who comes and shows her his stamp collection, which is a nice preview of episode 10, which is all about a stamp collection. And she remarks that he's this old man. She remarks that he, shows her stamps with the same enthusiasm that someone else might show you a picture of their children or their grandchildren. We get this this man at the end who was the person who was supposed to take Elżbieta in. So she visits him and he won't talk about what happened. He's clearly deeply traumatized by the events of the war and the events in, communist Poland afterwards.
We're told that actually he and his family were suspected by the resistance of being sort of secret collaborators, and that they were almost executed.
Yes.
And that they weren't executed ultimately, but that we're given to understand, it's suggested that this so traumatized him that it's almost like all of his trust is broken. And we have to again remind ourselves that at the time that this film is being made, Poland is very much not out of the woods, right? Yeah. They're still living under a communist regime. And so the very final image of the film is that man who's now a tailor, looking out the window at Zofia and Elżbieta as they're kind of having this moment together out on the street.
Yeah.
And I think that there's kind of a commentary in that, about this ongoing complex work of I don't know what it is, a kind of integration, understanding, it's a social project involving a lot of different parties, and I think that it's ultimately hopeful, right? I think that the film ultimately believes that these bridges can be repaired and that a kind of balance and reconciliation can be achieved. The final lines of the film are significant in this regard. Elżbieta comes out of the tailor's shop after basically being told by the tailor that he won't speak with her. Zofia meets her, and Elżbieta says, "What a strange country."
Yeah, exactly.
And then Zofia asks her, she says something like, "I saw you praying last night." And Elżbieta says, "Yes." And that's it. Then it cuts back to the face of the tailor, and then it fades to black.
And to put that in context, we get the impression that, well, throughout this classroom scene in particular, Elżbieta is playing with this necklace that she has a cross on it, but also, as our previous guest, Maria Elena, mentioned when we discussed Dekalog 5, she also has, I forget what Jewish symbol it is on the same necklace. So we get the sense that she may have actually become Catholic after all, even after being told that she couldn't be taken in by these Catholics for Catholic reasons, which is all the more interesting because this woman is not, the older woman, Zofia, is not practicing her faith. And there's a scene where when they're in that apartment building that they're visiting from back in the day, there's like a shrine to Mary in the courtyard, and neither of them really acknowledge it. But we do see her Elżbieta praying later. But so we got this. Yeah, this is What a Strange Country. This is one of the few kind of outsiders looks maybe we get. To Poland in this series, and then also when they're talking. There's this dialogue that almost seems a little self-indulgent in terms of writing, but makes sense in the way you contextualize it as this film that's kind of about Poland is like they're talking. She's like, "Oh yeah, those the woman and her husband and the doctor mentioned in the ethics class earlier. They live in this same building too, and everybody has their own story to tell, and so on, something like that." And so there is this like real self-consciousness about like the community and the way that people know each other or suspect each other or whatever, all these different things going on in Poland and in this community in particular. This episode is like almost like taking a step back and looking at some of that.
Right. And in that sense, it's really the first time I think in this series that we begin to get a sense of like the big picture that Kieslowski is like bringing everything toward with the ending of this series, right? I think that maybe we'll see more of this in Dekalog 9 and Dekalog 10, but certainly in this Dekalog 8, there's kind of the introduction of kind of like pulling some threads together from the various installments and beginning to sort of open up to a bigger picture about the series as a whole.
So much of it is, expressed explicitly in dialogue, though, that like, it just doesn't, for part of that, partially for that reason, it doesn't feel like as strong of an episode to me.
Right. It's almost as if this might work better as a radio drama, and that because so much of the drama that's contained in this installment is contained in the dialogue and in the interaction back and forth between them, right? And what's spoken and what's left unspoken. But I will say that there are some moments of cinematic suggestiveness, right? There's like some pretty obvious and yes, maybe even heavy-handed symbolism, right? The first and most obvious thing that comes to mind is this picture that keeps going crooked in Elżbieta's apartment, Zofia's apartment, the older woman's apartment.
Yeah.
We see her straighten it out, and then it goes crooked again. We later see Elżbieta also straighten it out.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, our friend Nathan talking about one of his beefs with Kieslowski is that he says that, he uses these symbols that are like very heavy-handed and yet like very vague at the same time.
Yeah.
Some of them work better than others. Like I think that the use of water and liquid in episode 1 is really great, for example, and it appears in so many different forms. In this it's like, oh, something needs to be set right or something,
Yeah, but you know what? Actually, I think that if it's taken by itself like that, then yes, it maybe seems a little empty or one-sided of a gesture. But I saw that particular symbol together with a whole sequence of what were like suggestive moments to me. So when Zofia goes to her apartment, we see her do a series of tasks that kind of involve this familiarity. She goes into her son's old room. She puts some fresh flowers in and picks up some dead petals and puts them, sort of clears them and puts them where they need to be. She goes into the kitchen to light the gas to boil some water. It won't light, maybe the gas isn't on, or I don't know what communist Warsaw was like. Maybe that wasn't totally reliable, but you get the sense that this isn't a problem because she goes and she plugs in the electric boiler and gets that ready. She goes to her car later and starts it, and it won't start. And she pauses, sort of gives it a moment, and then she starts it as one who knows how. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like she very much, I thought it was like a great moment of acting actually, because this was so relatable to me. This actress, right, maybe has never sat in that car before in her life. Mm-hmm. But the way she plays it is like, she knows how to start this car and get it going. And what that suggested to me was, again, this kind of familiarity with a place, right? With the workings of a place, how things might not be perfect, things might be kind of broken, but when you live in it, when this is your home, your car, you know how to navigate these situations and how to get things working. So later when Elżbieta comes to visit Zofia's apartment and she's in the son's room looking at things, the lamp begins to flicker, and she has to kind of toy with it and turn it on a few times to get it to stay on. And so again, there's like this gesture of the dynamics of familiarity with a place and being an insider or an outsider. And so I think that, to me, that suggested, that for Poland, this is a Polish work, that this is a Polish work of reconciliation, of coming together, of finding a way forward where, maybe not everything is smoothed over. Maybe not everything is fixed, but everything is workable, and that there is a kind of balance that can be achieved.
That's very
it requires maintenance, right? It requires maybe a constant realigning, but it's not a hopeless project. That was what I got from that.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting take. That's good observation. So I wanted to mention that I kept referring to episode 3. It's actually episode 2 that the characters reference, just so people won't be confused.
Thomas, if I can, there's one more thing that I wanted to mention, because I talked about Zofia's son's room. This is a space that we return to a few times throughout the film, and I'll be interested to know if this is something that you caught. I did not catch it the first time I watched it, and in fact, I didn't even catch it the second time I watched it. I was watching it with my father, and he was the one who pointed this out to me. But I think that there's a really strong case to be made that Zofia's son has actually committed suicide.
Oh.
Yeah. So she keeps flowers in her son's room. We see her doing this at the beginning. We see her doing it at the end. She also keeps, there's a letter on top of the dresser or whatever it is. I don't know if that's a letter from her. I think what's maybe more likely is that it's a letter from her son.
Wait, but doesn't she get that letter in the mail? At the beginning of the episode, she goes and gets her mail. Remember, and she's like, doesn't she put that letter on there when she gets home? After the first thing we see after the little intro with the little girl walking with the hand in hand with the guy at the beginning, she takes her jog, and then she goes in and gets her mail, and then we see her standing, and it's like, why are we watching her just like sort out her mail?
Right. Maybe so. Maybe so. I didn't track that. Yeah. I think that this just goes to show that like there's a level of specificity and attention to detail that's happening in these films that really stands to repeated viewing. But
and it's easy to say like, oh, we had this must be a hacky episode because of that 11.5-minute classroom episode. But then once you start looking at all the other details, there's clearly a lot that's not being said.
Right. Right, because my main reason for thinking this about her son is not that opening bit, but rather at the end, when Elżbieta has spent the night at Zofia's house, and Elżbieta says to her the next morning, in like a very charged way, we can see that she's not sure how to broach this subject, but she simply asks her, "Was that your son's room that I stayed in?" Mm-hmm. And Zofia says yes, and I don't remember the exchange exactly, but Elżbieta asks her something about, and where is he? And Zofia says, let's just say he's far away from me. In this like very like knowing way. And then she like gazes off into the distance in this like very sort of like wistful and even loving way.
We get a lot of those gazes, by the way. That's something I've noticed, is that like at the end of her run, remember she's like resting her head
on the
log.
That's a nice shot.
And then after she's setting things up in the apartment, she's messing around with the stove in the morning, the first scene in there, and she sort of gazes out the window or something. That happens a number of times. I have to say, I don't think that he's dead. I really took that to mean he's gotten himself as far away from me as possible, that her personal life has not gone great. Her relationship with her son is not really healthy, that they're somewhat alienated. And I do think that she was, if I'm not mistaken, I do think she was bringing in a letter, from her mail. I think it has to be, because otherwise, why would he show us this scene of linger on her sorting out her mail in the hallway?
It's not that long. It's not that long, but we can take a look. In
a 15-minute film, showing anything at all is taking a long time with it.
Fair enough. In any case, I think it says something about the generation in Poland that did not live through World War II.
Yeah.
And yet still has suffered the consequences in some sense.
Well, remember, and this in one of the sort of Blu-ray commentary things with this Kieslowski scholar was talking about. She compared this woman with the woman in number 6, the old lady in number 6, who's her son is away from her as well.
Yeah.
So we get these parents kind of alienated from their children, and it's interesting because we see in the previous, in episode 7, we see a child, and then it's almost like in this episode we see someone, the consequences of childhood trauma, playing out in a way that we haven't in the same way in previous episodes.
That's right. And that's another thread that's sort of being brought together with this episode is that it's said explicitly that nothing is more important than the life of a child. What is it? I think I have it written down in my notes.
There is no idea or cause more important than the life of a child.
Yeah, there's no idea, no cause, nothing.
And the other thing that's said is, which triggers this when she's in the class and they're talking about the abortion scenario in episode 2. And she says, the most important thing is that the child is alive. Or no, she says, I'm going to make this problem more difficult for you, this ethical dilemma, by telling you that the child is alive. And that may be the most important thing. And that's what sets Elżbieta off to come to the front of the class and start bringing up her scenario. So that does raise all these other philosophical problems in the episode. How does the outcome matter? If you're considering an ethical question, why does Kieslowski have this said? The most important thing is that the child is alive when we're looking at this ethical question. How does that bear on, looking at, in a present moment sort of vantage point, looking at an ethical problem? And I'm not sure what he's gesturing at there, but then later she says there is no idea or cause more important than the life of a child. And I don't know, it's interesting because I think I brought up in a previous episode some quotes from Kieslowski kind of indicating that you get the sense that he thinks that there are kind of no right choices, or no there's only less bad choices. You almost get the sense that he thinks that these commandments might set up dilemmas that are irresolvable, and you just have to make a choice. And so there is no idea or cause more important than the life of a child. That could refer to the the Polish resistance, but it could also refer to kind of this ethical dilemma and kind of brushing it aside. Okay, can you ever tell a falsehood, to achieve something good? We'll brush that aside. We've just heard the most important thing from episode 2 is that the child is alive. And now later we're hearing there's no idea or cause more important than the life of a child. And you pointed out as well that maybe the episode is not really interested in that ethical dilemma, but in the fallout of it. Now that could be a matter of what this episode is choosing to focus on, but I just wonder if there's something of Kieslowski saying okay, these abstract moral principles only have so much value, and what's important is human life, essentially.
Yeah, well, and because the child is the most susceptible to lies. I think that
Right, and we see that in this
Yes.
episode.
Yes.
Because the lie that they told was that they couldn't lie.
Yeah.
Or that's why they were turning her away.
Right. Yeah, and the very first image of the film is two hands coming together, a child's hand reaching to grab an adult's hand and being led down these Warsaw roads. This is the only shot that we get from the 40s of the young Elżbieta walking to the apartment. Yeah. But you know, that's such a, like, seeing that image, that frame of the child's hand reaching and the adult's hand grabbing, it kind of underscores this responsibility that adults have toward children in not bearing false witness, right, against them. That children are the ones who have to live with the lies, who are most wounded by the lies, and who look to us to give them the truth. You know, and I think that at risk of dating this episode, given everything that's going on right now in the world, and in the United States, in our schools and with our children, it's like there's a real responsibility that we have to give them the truth. Yeah. And I worry about, what the consequences of these falsehoods are, about on a whole generation, perpetrated on a whole generation.
Right. So, but what's interesting though in this is that, the most important thing maybe that the child's alive. And we get that too in that, she seems to be a Catholic. And so at the end of the day, she was turned away as a little Jewish child by a Catholic couple under the pretense that their Catholic faith prevented them from saving her life. And she ends up as a Catholic. Not only does she survive, but she ends up as a Catholic. So we get this, like, kind of like in the end, at least in this scenario, things came out okay for her. Yeah. And in a way, with this woman, she's the one she's dealt with it as much as,
that's right,
anybody else. And this man who wasn't able to take her in. And she's estranged from her son in whatever way. And she's been feeling guilty all these years. And she's not going to church anymore. She still believes in God. She still believes in truth. She wants to guide her students toward that, but she is at a distance. Yeah.
That's a really good point.
It's an interesting aspect. And, I don't know if Kieslowski is kind of like denigrating kind of abstract laws and principles or not in this. But certainly he's trying to focus on something different in this episode. So that's interesting. There's a couple other, like, philosophical or whatever anthropological ideas invoked. One of which, I want to see if you made anything of this, because I didn't really, is like this idea of the saviors and the saved. Yeah. That she brings up. This is after they leave the classroom and they meet in the hallway and have their first private conversation.
The rescuers and the rescued.
Yeah. Yeah. And so she first brings up this problem, Elżbieta, like, some research studies have been done showing that, like, there's sort of like certain traits that people have who save others. And she says, you have those traits because after the incident with me, you were well known for helping and rescuing a lot of other people. And then it comes back again later. I forget when. I think it's when they're in her apartment talking. And she kind of says, like, why is it that some people can only save and others can only be saved? And I don't really quite understand what she's getting, what's being driven at here with that.
Yeah, me neither.
It doesn't really resonate with me.
Well, I think one of the things that she's grappling with is the humiliation of being at the mercy of others.
Right.
I think that she wishes that she had never been put in that position. Right. And in fact, that she didn't still feel like she was in that position, but you know, it does sort of ring hollow when she says this, like, you know, yeah, there have been studies that have shown that some people have these rescuer traits and others have these rescued traits.
Yeah.
Because I think the reason it rings hollow is because we see so much similarity between Zofia and Elżbieta, that one gets the sense that their roles could have just as easily been reversed, and they've both suffered, you know?
Yeah. Right.
So
right. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
So, you know, I don't know if that's supposed to be taken to be, you know, a reliable description of the way things are. But if it is, I'm not sure what it's getting at.
It's clearly something that she's preoccupied with, but it's just kind of a weird.
Well, she does. She humiliates Zofia at the apartment when she hides from her and causes her to panic and worry about her. And all the while, she's just been sitting in the car waiting for her. So there is this kind of power dynamic to it, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think about the way things are so often cast as oppressor and oppressed, and sort of people split up into groups, and you wonder how helpful that is. Yeah. I don't wonder, actually. I know that it's not helpful. And I think that as long as she's thinking in these terms in the film, it's not helpful either. Yeah.
But she lets go of that, at least. I mean, she apologizes to her for doing that, and they have a more real conversation as the episode goes on.
Right, but there is, I think, after Zofia has been humiliated, maybe even she is able to have a more real conversation, right? Mm-hmm. That she's able to sort of drop some of the pretense of yes, I'm going to bring you back to this apartment and sort of force some kind of closure or confrontation. You know, things are turned on their head for Zofia as well. And the both of them go back to her apartment, have tea together, and really for the first time are just totally sincere, totally forthright with one another.
Yeah,
you know?
And it's been observed too that the first time you see them together in a frame is that scene where they're sitting close to one another. Yeah. You know, after she kind of explains the real reason that she was turned away.
So maybe for both of them, there has to be this kind of humbling, that Zofia has to be humbled in her sort of perception of herself as a rescuer. And ironically, paradoxically even, Elżbieta has to be humbled in her perception of herself as a victim, or as having to be a rescued person, you know?
Yeah. The other thing maybe worth mentioning is like this conversation that they have about God, and like she asks her, "What are you trying to teach your students?" She talks about leading them towards truth. She doesn't necessarily use the word God, you know, but she talks about this like something that's inside of us, and she seems to be talking about conscience, or God in the sort of present in the conscience.
Yeah.
And she says, you know, some people do turn away from God, but she goes on to say something about like, well, you know, or Elżbieta say, what did they replace him with? And she says, well, you know, in this life, solitude, and then the next life. And then she says, you know, you think it through. If there's no life after death, you know, and then she interrupts herself.
It's like they don't even finish these thoughts. Yeah. It's just left to kind of trail off or just be stopped.
It's as if there's nothing after death, then so I wonder like where was she headed with that, you know?
Yeah. I don't know, but one thing's for sure is that this Decalogue, this 8th Decalogue, really holds its own alongside the others. The first on a first watch, it's maybe a little discomforting, a little like frustrating even, but on a repeated viewing, you really get the sense that this is as densely packed as any of the others.
Yeah.
And is a worthwhile to excavate.
Yeah, I don't know if I like it as much as some of the others, just because of the like amount of time that's spent on, you know, seemingly exposition,
right,
you know, and dialogue. It doesn't. I kind of agree with you that it would work as well as a radio play, you know, as a film.
Right.
I do want to bring up one other thing. This guy in the park. First of all, like her
sorry,
diet.
I totally forgot about him.
Her exercise, her diet, and the guy in the park. Hold on, I've got a phone ringing. my dad's printer, my dad's new printer rings when there's a phone call, and there's no button to like turn it off. You can only press accept. I don't know what. That's bizarre. So, okay, I wanted to bring up the scene near the end with the guy doing gymnastics. The contortionist
Yeah.
in the park, and all that's made of her diet and exercise. I mean, the first time we're introduced to her in this film is when she's on a run. She's like in her tracksuit, she's running. It kind of like the effect that first scene has on me is like, oh, like this is like an old lady who's running, and she's got her gear, and she like the effect that it has on you is like of a competent person who like really has it together, you know. And then she goes into the school, and we see everybody, you know, greeting her and honoring her and stuff, and we don't really see her losing her composure until the initial confrontation with Elżbieta. But then we also see she's on a diet. She's got this list. She's on this like very sparse diet. Elżbieta gets her to like have a normal breakfast with her towards the end of the film before they go across the river to see the other guy. And then right before that, actually, she goes on another run and she sees this contortionist on like a platform in the park, and he's doing all sorts of weird moves, and she talks to this young man. The tone of the scene is like totally different from the rest of the episode. He's like really cheerful and goofy, and she's like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, there's this guy on TV who everybody thinks is the best, and I'm trying to like do things that he can't do so that I can like beat him. And he's like, oh, you try it. And so she like leans back, and she's like, you know, she can't go very far back, and he's like, oh, well, it's too late. You can't learn now.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's interesting. So like, why do you think that we're given all this stuff with her exercise and diet in the film?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I think my first stab at that is just to think that maybe it's parallel to this consideration of maintenance of a place, right? You know, maintaining my body with a diet or with exercise. This is a very particularized thing, you know, and it stems from my familiarity with myself and knowing what my body needs, and also what I'm aiming for, you know, what my goals are, and so I think, you know, in that interaction between her and the contortionist, there is a snapshot of two different bodies, two different people with two different goals and two different sort of demands on themselves and requirements that need to be fulfilled. You know, I don't know. It's tough. Yeah.
I mean, like the scene at the end, you know, it's too late now. She's trying. It's tearful. She doesn't like get upset when he says that,
right?
You know? But you know, in that has some resonance in like an episode that's about the effects of the past, and like living for decades with something that happened in the past and the person that it makes you into. In fact, there's even a line where Elżbieta said, like, I can't believe, like, I would never have thought that you know, the woman then, you know, would have become the person that I'm with now. And she said, well, that's what happened. I guess like there's a gesture there. It's such a weird way like of going out of, if this is what it is, it's a weird way of like going out of his way, Kieslowski, to say this, but like this kind of like, okay, there's resolution here, but you know, the past is the past and you can't change it. You know, you can't change what you've become in like well, you can, but like not in like a complete sense. Not, sure. I don't know. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's. I don't know. That's a legitimate take. I mean, another one is that humans can exist in all of these sorts of strange contortions, right? We can adapt into, I mean, all sorts of things. So there's a versatility to humans.
So she's translating the works of her, you know, the woman who turned her away as a child. That's a strange contortion. Yeah. You know.
Yeah.
The stamp guy.
Right.
the tailor who is like, okay, all I can do is make you a dress, and he's perfectly, polite and happy to do tailor stuff, but not anything else. And he's got this box that he's in. Right.
And it's also remarkable that the contortionist is really like the only uncomplicated figure that we encounter in this episode. Right. He's cheerful and straightforward, and
it's like a Werner Herzog documentary character.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we managed to talk about this one. For as long as we have. It's amazing to me. It's continually amazing to me how rich these Dekalog films are, and just how much can be talked about.
Yeah, I thought this episode would be like a half hour long.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've only got 2 left.
It's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm happy that we're finishing it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the next one because I basically have no memory of it, so it'll be like I remember this one pretty well.
That's true. I actually this marks the Dekalog 8 marks like the limit of my memory of this series. I know that I've seen these last 2, but I didn't even remember that the stamp guy is like an anticipation of something that we're going to see down the road. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah. Number 10 is like a comedy. He caps it off with a comedy. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And we're going to ask you to subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Please do consider donating. catholicculture.org/donate/audio to help us keep all of our podcasts and videos going. It might be worth actually, because we haven't talked about this in a while, reminding people if they want to watch Dekalog, what would be a good way to do it. So it's not really available for streaming in a normal way, but you can there is a site called easterneuropeanmovies.com, and I know that doesn't sound very legit, but it is like a legal streaming service for Eastern European films. So with a subscription to that, you can watch all of Dekalog. I don't know if it's like the same restored version that we have on Blu-ray. The best way to get it is to get the, it's a little pricey, but to get the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, there might be a DVD too, I don't know, slightly cheaper DVD set of the restored version from 2016. Second best, just go to your library, because your library may well have, if not the most recent edition, then some edition of Dekalog for you to watch. There's been a number of releases over the past couple decades. So that might be for somebody who wants to save money, go into the library. And that's true of a lot of these films in general. A great many of them you should be able to find at a decent sized library, I think. So check that out. And I hope that people will be able to listen and comment, give us feedback. We'd definitely be interested to see to hear how other people experienced, viewing these films for the first time. Thanks, James, for this. This was a good episode. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. And thanks everyone for listening.